Hello and welcome to Consulting Ninja. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe for me. If you find this content helpful, then hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next video. Comment below with your thoughts or topics you'd like me to cover, and check out my website, consultingninja.tech. With that out of the way, I'm just going to get right to it. Do you want to make a Google sign-in button for your website, but it's all just too complicated? How about using a new code generator from Google that allows you to enter in your information, choose the options that you want, and generate some HTML markup that you can copy and paste into an HTML file, along with a script tag to load the GSI client, and bam, you now have a sign in with Google button on your website. If you want to see how to do this, stay tuned. That's what we're going to do right now. So yes, you heard me correctly. There is now a code generator that Google is making available to generate HTML code that you can put in an HTML file that will generate a Google sign-in button for you. This is super straightforward. It's called Google GSI. I have no idea how they came up with that acronym because it's actually called Sign In with Google for Web. It's part of Google's identity services. So again, I have zero ideas how they came up with the acronym GSI. But looking at the documentation for this, it's no wonder that it has a name at all. Google's documentation is absolutely terrible. I'm going to show you guys how to do this. It's super straightforward. Let's go take a look at the documentation. So in Google Identity Services, you can go to identity/GSI/web and it will bring you here. I'll leave a link in the description. I also will point out that all of the source code for all of my projects is always available in my repositories, and I will leave a link in the description to those as well. So looking at the setup, you do have to have a client ID set up in your developer console. I'm not going to go through that right now. I will put a mark in the video to skip ahead if you want to go watch that portion and then come back to this. But you do need a client ID set up in your developer console. The only thing I will point out is that in the credentials portion for that client ID, you have to have HTTP localhost without a port number set as an authorized JavaScript origin in order to make this work. Otherwise, this will not work. So be sure you have both a local host without a port and the actual port that you're going to use if you're going to do this. Besides that, what do we need to do? We can skip ahead to the load the client library. All you need to do to load the GSI client is copy and paste this script tag into an HTML file. Now, I've done this by hijacking a Vite front end, and I've replaced the index.html file that would typically be used to inject some React or some Svelte, and I've just cut out that injection point and I've replaced it with an HTML file that's being statically served. There's no additional code being rendered in here other than what's inside the HTML file itself. So I've copy and pasted that script tag in the top here, just like it said. So now I've got the client loaded in my HTML file. Then you can click on Generate the Integration Code. This is so straightforward, it's really kind of crazy. This is by far the easiest sign-in method that I've found using Google. I've done this video a few times using many different methods: Pocketbase, SvelteKit, React, and Express. This is by far the easiest way, and I'll get to why in just a minute. But the code generator is super straightforward. You take your client ID and you paste it in to the top section there. You choose what context you're wanting, if it's a sign-in, a sign-up, or just use the account. Login URI. This is if you're using a redirect method. I recommend that you don't do that because if you're using the redirect method, it says you're supposed to get a code. In my other videos, I've shown how you can generate a login URL and ping that URL and Google will send you back a code. That does not work with this. Instead, what they send you is a cross-site request forgery token, and you have to go through a whole bunch of hoops, including getting the document and pulling out the URL to get the current public keys from Google. I have included that stuff in the API. If you go look at that, there is a route called getKeys, and if you ping this route, it will go and it will grab what's called a discovery document. This discovery document has many different fields to it. One of them is the most important, and it's the JWKS_URI. If you ping that URI, it will return the public certificates for Google. You can then use those to unpackage the cross-site request forgery token, and then you can proceed the authentication route from there. But that is so much extra work. I don't know why anybody would want to do that. I have included that route in the API if you need to go that route, but by far the easiest way I have found is go to the JavaScript callback method and enter in the function name here. I called mine handle auth, and so that's what you type in here. It needs to match whatever function you have in your HTML file. Google is going to do its thing and then pass the response back from their server to that function. So just make sure that it matches your function name, hit next, and now for sign-in methods, you only have one available, enable sign-in with Google button, and that is because the one tap, you can't even play around with that one without using HTTPS. You have to have SSL enabled to even start testing that one. So go ahead and just use the enable sign-on with Google button. And then here you get to choose all kinds of options here. You can choose a language. You can set it to whatever language your country's from, a behavior, pop-up or redirect. I always choose pop-up again for those reasons I already pointed out. If you go the redirect route, you're going to get a cross-site request forgery token and not the credential that comes back that I'm going to show you. After you've chosen those options, you then get to pick what you want your button to look like. You can choose a theme, light, dark, blue, white. You can choose it in icon mode, all of the same stuff, square, circle. You have all of these different choices to get the button exactly how you'd like it. And then once you're done and you have it how you'd like it, you simply click the Get Code button, and Google generates this code that you copy and paste into your HTML file. So you take this, copy, go to your HTML file and paste it right in there. That's all I've done here. So that code is what generates this button, and it also generates the code that runs when you click it. The user can then choose their account. If they're not signed in, they can enter their username and password, and then they select the account they want to use if they are signed in, and then this will go to Google and get an authorization credential and send that back. Now let's take a look at the documentation, because I want to point out that the documentation again is wrong. If you look at the documentation for the portion where it says verify the Google ID token server side, this is the only part that you need to do on your server, is taking the actual response and verifying it on your server. Now here you can see that they talk about that cross-site request forgery token, but this is not actually what comes. Nor is the normal course of events in all of the other methods that I've implemented Google sign-in. They send you back a code. That's also not what happens here. In this instance, when you're using GSI, don't follow the documentation. The documentation is wrong. Unfortunately, Google has not corrected it. We'll see what they do going forward. Hopefully they make this match, but their documentation is pretty terrible. I've had to play around with this a lot. So inside of my HTML file, I'm going to do this one step at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to comment out the part that pings my backend, and I'm just going to console.log the response. So that you guys can see how Google sends this back. So you can see here what comes back is actually client ID and client underscore ID, as well as this credential field. Now, there is no documentation that talks about what this actually is. I found in a reference buried in the bottom, they talked about this field being the ID token, and that's exactly what's going on here. In order to verify this and get any sort of usable information, I had to play around with this for a really long time before I finally found that tiny little reference about credential actually being the ID. And I just thought, hey, you know what? Let's give this a shot and see if this actually works. So instead of looking for a code, I took the credential and passed it from my front end to my back as a search param. I just left it called code, and then in every other method you would take that code in order to get some tokens. since the reference I found said that credential was in fact the ID token, I skipped all of that and went right to passing their credential that I just called code as a search param into the verify ID token method of the OAuth2 client, and wouldn't you know it, there is all of our information. Credential is in fact the ID token itself, and that is all of this information. We have the algorithm that was used, we have the payload, who issued it, the audience here would match whatever your client ID is. We have my email address. Email verified equals true. Now, I've talked before about Google explicitly saying don't trust the emails to be the users. Don't save the email address as the user, because the way that this works with Google accounts is that you can create a Google account with a Yahoo email address or some other web service email address. They do sometimes verify them, in which case this field will be true, and then you'll know that it's either a Gmail address or they've verified that the email address is in fact good. But you can't just save the email as the user, because it's not always the case where that will even be a static item. If they have used a different email address to create their Google account, they can change it in the future. And so it's not something that will always be a static item. So just something to keep in mind there. And then we have the name. This is a combination of a given name and family name. The URL to the picture that's stored in Google, that could definitely be helpful if you want to render out their photo on your website. And then we have the name split into the given name and the family name. So that's what actually comes back, and it's all actually in the credential field, which is the ID token field itself. So if you're wondering what's going on here, that is what's going on. I have also included in the API a few other ways of getting information. If you're using any of the other methods, let's say that you have to use a different backend from your front end, and so you're sending that redirect, you'll get that cross-site request forgery token. And if you're needing to unpackage that out, I've added in these other functions. One, you can ping with the access token, and that will give you data back. The other, you can ping with the ID token, and that will give you information back as well. It will authenticate that token for you and send back similar information to what I just showed you, although slightly different. That's all available for you. And then again, I also wrote the getKeys route for you guys. If you need to go that cross-site request forgery route, then you're going to need to get the discovery doc so that you guys can see what that looks like. I've included a button here, and I'll just uncomment this out and show you what that looks like. Toggle that out and save. I created this button called My Life Sucks. I've called the button My Life Sucks because if you are forced to go the cross-site request forgery route and have to go take all these extra steps, then that would really suck. And so that's why I named it that. But if you click that button, what it does is it goes out and prints off that discovery document. And this is everything that comes back in that. So we have all of this information. This is static information. You could store this in your application statically if you want. This Google does not change that URI. It's always going to be that. And you can ping that and get this information back. And what this has is the issuer, an authorization endpoint that you can use, a token endpoint that you can use, and a user info endpoint, which is the old version, so don't use that. Use the one that I gave you guys. Here's that JWKS underscore URI endpoint. This is what gives you those Google certificates. And then just so much information. Here's all the claims that you can support. That is the discovery document. And then if you wanted to, I also have a console.log in there that will console.log the certs. So we could change this up. I'll take off that comment, save that, and we'll comment out the discovery. Then we just need to restart our server. And now I'll click that My Life Sucks button one more time. And here are the certificates that come back. We have what kind of key they are, the key ID, and the actual key. So, and what algorithms used. So then you can use these, like I said, if you needed to go that route to start manually verifying those JSON web tokens and unpackaging the claims to pull out the information that you need, which would just be more tokens that you have to then re-verify. So you definitely don't want to go that route if you don't want to, but I did make this available just in case you needed it. There it is. There's the discovery document and the certificates coming back. Now, once you have this information, what you would do with it is completely up to you. You could save this in a database. You could store it locally and make use of it that way. You could also, if you don't want to do any back-end stuff, you could use this to simply add some flair to your front end and ask for users if they want to sign in. You could then send this information back and give them a more personalized website. Or you could go the traditional authentication route and save this to a database, save this to the OAuth2 client, and then check authentication every time they need to do something. So you can do whatever you'd like with it, but this is by far the easiest method that I have found for implementing a Google sign-in button. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe, comment with your thoughts. Take care, and as always, have a great day. The very first thing that you need to do is set up your Google Developer Console. You can just go to Google search and type in Google Developer Console, and then click the first link that comes up. It should be the console.developers.google.com. You do have to have a project in order to do this, so if you don't have one, click Create Project. All you really need here is a name. You don't have to choose a location, and the name is only important for you. If you've already created a project, you need to go into the Actions menu and click Settings. Once you're inside of your project, you'll be presented with a dashboard. You need to go to the navigation menu all the way in the top left-hand corner and select APIs and Services, and then go to OAuth Consent Screen. You can only have one consent screen per project, and I already have one since I've been showing how to do this with other stacks, so I'll just go through and edit this one. You do have to choose a name for the consent screen. This is what's going to be presented to the users, as well as a user support email. If you want to give a logo, you can. It's not required, but it does make it look better. The app domain information is not required here, but authorized domains is. You can just put localhost.com. If you move to production, then you would want to put whatever your domain is .com. The last required piece of information on this step is the developer contact information, and you can use the same email address as the support email. The next step, and this is the really important one, is defining scopes for your consent screen. The scopes are what you're telling your user you're going to do once they give you access. In order to authenticate using Google, you have to have the basic three. This will be empty by default, so you can just click Add or Remove Scopes and select the first three options: userinfo.email, userinfo.profile, as well as OpenID. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're using the OAuth2 client, you have to list out the scopes one after another in an object that you pass in. That is in the form of a URL, where all of them start with a base URL of https www.googleapis.com, and then this picks up from there. So you can come back to this screen when you're setting up your scopes in your backend and just copy and paste any ones out that you need. For the sake of our video, again, we're just authenticating, so we're going to use these three. When your scopes are defined, click Save and Continue. When you first set this up, your project will be in test mode, and while you're testing, the only people that the consent screen will work for are users that you have listed as test users. So you need to make sure that you have whoever you're going to be testing this with listed here in the test users list. Once you have all that done, just make sure that everything is correct and click Save. So with your consent screen done, you need to set up credentials. So go to the Credentials tab and click Create Credentials. These are going to be OAuth Client ID credentials, and we're going to have an application type of web application. The name here doesn't matter. This is just going to be for your reference. It'll show up in the list of all your credentials. The part that is important are these two pieces. The authorized JavaScript origins are where you're going to be pinging this from, so basically where the request is coming from. And the redirect URIs is where the requests are going out to. And you can have multiple set up for both of these. You can have multiple places that the origin comes from, and you can have multiple places that the redirect goes to. For the sake of this example, we're going to be coming from http://localhost 5173. That's our Vite front end. And then we're going to be going to http://127.0.0.1 port 3000 /OAuth. So be sure to give that a save. I'm going to be using credentials I already created because the note here on the bottom says this can take 5 minutes to a few hours, and we don't have that long. Once you click create though, it's going to present you with this screen that just says, hey, we created your client. And the two pieces of information that you're going to need from here in order to make this work are the ID and the secret.